To preserve the independence of the people, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. Thomas Jefferson. The United States federal government debt spending and deficit spending has been increasing perpetually and unsustainably for several decades now. I became interested in this topic a couple of years ago, and I've done a lot of research on it, and I found a lot of things, and it's very interesting and quite scary, actually. Well, to start out with, the public debt and public deficit spending is not good. It stifles public growth, it leads into an endless cycle of more debt, and it undermines national security. To give you kind of an idea of what the public debt is, you might have heard some of these numbers before. According to the debt clock, which is kind of run by the CBO and the GEC, which is kind of the Congress and the Senate, there is $13 trillion of federal public debt right now. And then unfunded liabilities, which are basically, imagine the government mandating $100 to buy a big screen TV. So what they do is they put that money into a pool, and they spend that money on the TV, but then imagine there's an Xbox that's also $100. Well, they call that $100 a surplus and also spend that $100 on the Xbox too, basically kind of creating money out of thin air. According to the debt clock, which is again run by the Congress, there is $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities that the United States government has. And to kind of give you an idea of what $1 trillion is, you would have to spend $1 million a day for 2,700 years to reach $1 trillion. So this stifles public market or the private market growth. Kind of imagine for a minute this analogy given by Chris Edwards, an economist for the Brookings Economic Study Program. Imagine a government and three entities. One entity is a government beneficiary, one entity is the taxpayers, and the last entity is investors. Well, in order to get all this money, this government goes to the investors and they issue what are called treasury bills, which is basically when an investor buys a treasury bill, they're buying debt. So let's say I bought a $100 treasury bill, I bought $100 worth of government debt. So they take that money from the investors and they give it to the government beneficiaries. Well, right away, that doesn't do so much to the economy, but in a couple of years when they have to pay that investment back, who do they go to? Well, they could go to the investors and get more money to pay the investors back. That's Ponzi scheme-like, and that's no good. So who else would they go to? They can't go to the government beneficiaries because they're receiving money from the government. They go to the taxpayers, and they tax the taxpayers to pay this money back. Well, what does this do to the taxpayers? Most taxes are taxed on the productive sectors of the economy. You wouldn't tax the bum on the street, but you would tax the business owner because he's being productive and he's producing. So with all this, the added tax to pay off the debt, you're decreasing private investment and economic growth. It also leads to another thing called crowding out, where government investment takes over for private investment, and then you end up with the end of the cycle of more debt, because the market, since it's a very sensitive place, responds to all this extra government spending, and it leads to more debt that way. It also affects the currency. Kimberly Amato, an economist and president of the World Money Watch, talks about how the debt affects the dollar. Imagine you are in serious debt. Your money isn't going to be worth a lot to the banks anymore because you're in such high debt. It'll be a lot harder for you to get money, and your money to others will be worth less. Another effect of the public debt and deficit spending is it puts you at the whim of others. So when they give out these treasury bills, most of these treasury bills are bought by other countries and other private corporations. So then you have these controlling interests of these other countries in the market and in the government. Imagine for a moment if Nazi Germany had owned 50% of the United States public debt. Would we have gone to war with them in World War II? Probably not, because they have an invested interest in the United States government and a controlling influence. So who does this affect? This affects everyone. Since it is the government debt, it's everyone's debt. And it's getting bigger. The CBO, the Congressional Budgeting Office, projects that by 2020, the public debt will have grown by $8.5 trillion. And that's added to the $13 trillion I told you about before. Imagine how much bigger the $100 trillion debt will be. And to kind of give you an idea of how it even affects you more, the public face that $13 trillion I told you about, if you divided that among every citizen in the United States, that's $50,000 per person. Right away when you're born into this country, you owe somebody, some other country or corporation, $50,000. If you translated that into the unfunded liabilities, the $100 trillion I told you about, that translates into $350,000 per person. This is unacceptable. So what is the solution to this problem? It's more simple than you would think it is. The whole premise of it is that it would cut spending, and in this process it would phase out a lot of the current programs that are wasting a lot of money and that are leading to a lot of these liabilities. It would also require change in the tax code. There would have to be changes in how the taxes are done and how and who is taxed and how much they're taxed. According to the CBO, the Congressional Budgeting Office, about 30% of Americans pay little to no taxes, and that'll have to change a little bit too. So how will this work? Well, it targets the source of the deficit spending, all these extra programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. But before you kind of attack me for that, there's a solution to that problem as well. And it kind of illustrates how kind of minuscule our problem is compared to other countries. According to the CIA World Factbook, as a debt as a percentage of GDP, our debt is less than that of France, Spain, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Britain. So how will this be implemented? Well, first it will target a change in federal fiscal policy. But how will that occur? Step one of the plan is to get public awareness and public support for this plan. As a representative democracy, our representatives are beholden to the people, and if the people decided that they wanted this to change and they voted actively on that, things would change. Step two, the attitudes of the public must be changed about federal spending, including attitudes towards welfare, like Social Security and stuff. This will have to be cut from the government, but there is another way the government can provide for this without it actually directly paying for it. Instead of the government directly giving money to people, it should encourage private charity spendings by giving tax breaks to corporations who give out free clothes, free food and stuff, or giving tax breaks to, say, doctors who work in free clinics and things like that to help the poor part of the population. So, and then step three will have to do with negotiating with debt-holding entities of United States public debt. And hopefully an agreement can be reached with them to either extend the time we can pay that or even get rid of some of that debt. The costs associated with this plan are probably the biggest cost will be to the people that are government beneficiaries, but as what I said in step two, this should pretty much be offset by other actions taken. And so there is a problem. We do have a large debt, and it is becoming very destructive. If it isn't turned around now, there's no telling what would happen. It would not be very good. And with this solution, it should be able to target all of these problems and should be able to reverse it within a time. That time will probably be closer to several decades because of the massive debt we have, but it will be changed. And as Poor Richard truly says, "'Tis hard for an empty money bag to stand upright."